Welcome everyone to another week of Ramban on HaTorah. Obviously, we're still in the middle of a war here in Eretz Yisrael, and our learning should be both zchus or le'ilu nishmas, those who lost their lives already, and zchus for those the chayalim who are fighting, and the chatufim who I can only imagine how horrible it is. And obviously we pray and we learn for their speedy return. Okay, I want to do a number of Rambans today. We'll see what we have time for. But let's start with the basic issue that I think we all know since we're children, right? Eila told us Noach. Noach ish tzadik tamim haya b'dorotav. What does it mean, b'dorotav? So Rashi says, right, yesh dorshim lishvach, v'yesh dorshim lignai. Some people think it's a praise to Noach. If he's a tzaddik in a generation that has no other tzaddikim, how much greater he would have been if he was in a generation like Avraham that had other people to support him. And others say it's like, no, he was bidorotav tzaddik, but had he lived in the generation of Avraham, lo haya nechshav leklum. He would have been thought of to be nothing. Okay? The Ramban doesn't see the issue at all. The Ramban says as follows. V'hinei, be'enai lefi apshat shehu levado hatzadik bidorot hahem. Says the Ramban, it's not telling you that Noach was greater or less great, bidorotav. It was telling you he was the only tzaddik in that generation. Ein bidorotav tzaddik v'lo tamim zulato. There was no other tzaddik or tamim at the time. It was just Noach. V'chein ki otcha ra'iti tzaddik lefanai bador hazeh. He was the only one. She'ein acher bidor ra'ui lehinatzel. There was nobody else who was worthy of being saved by God. V'amar bidor. Okay, so that's the first point. The Ramban doesn't know what the big deal is about this machlokes. Was he only a tzaddik in his generation or other generations? The Ramban says it's simple. He was a tzaddik in his generation. There was no one else. The Torah isn't telling you something better or worse about Noach. It's simply describing the fact that there was no one else. Why does it say bidorotav? Bidorotav is a plural. Sounds like in many generations. So the Ramban says the obvious thing. V'amar b'dorotav ki dorot rabim avru me'et shishchitu ve'ein tzadik ba'aretz bilto. Not only was he the only tzaddik in his generation, says the Ramban, he was the only tzaddik in many generations. There simply was no redeeming person and no one for whom God would have saved the world until Noach came. And in fact, God did not save the world for Noach, but he saved Noach and his family. Okay, I think that the discussion and the whole debate about whether Noach was a great tzaddik or not, and whether he would have been something great in other generations or not, has to do with something that's not mentioned in the parsha at all. Maybe it'll come up later, maybe it won't, but that is the fact that it appears, at least in the Pshuto Shel Mikra, that Noach does nothing to get the people to do tshuva. Noach never goes around saying, Od arba'im yom v'nin beina hapachat. He's not like Yonah. God's going to save him, so he's saved. I think behind the scenes, that's a major, major discussion and a major point of focus, whether he did or not. Of course, the Torah acknowledges that Noach was asked to build a massive teva, and it took him 120 years, so that anybody who passed by would say, hey, what are you doing? And presumably Noach would have said to them, I'm building a teva because God's going to destroy the world. None of that is in the Torah. A big discussion why that's not in the Torah, but let's leave it for now. Okay. Let's go on in that first parsha. We're in Perek Hey. Let's go to Pasuk Yutet. Says the Torah, V'akimoti et bri'itach u'vata la'teva atov v'anecha v'ishtechon v'anecha itach. Right, God, I'll keep my covenant with you. You'll come to the teva. Umikol hachai, mikol basar shnai, mikol tavil ateva lachayot itach zachar nekeva yihiu. And you have to bring 2 of every animal. Okay. Now says the Ramban. First, just a basic question, which most of us would be embarrassed to ask because it sounds, God forbid, like a lack of emunah or something. Says the Ramban very simply, Yadua ki hachayot rabot ma'od. There are many, many animals. Umehen gidolot ma'od kipilim ukireimim v'zulatam. Some of the animals individually are enormous. Right? Try to get an elephant on a boat. It's enormous. V'haremes haromei sal haaretz rav ma'od. Right? There are many, many creepy crawling things. Gam me'of hashamayim minim rabim ein lahem mispar. There's an I don't want to say infinite, but there's almost an unlimited number of birds and types of birds. Ukemo shamu rabotenu me'av esrim minei ofot tumeim yesh b'mizrach v'kulam min ayahem. Right, there are 120 different types of one species of bird that exists in the Mizrach. Ula ofot torim ein mispar. Right, and the number and the types of birds, it's limitless. Now, as an aside, we're not going to see this in the Ramban. The Ramban does say all these animals came to Noach. He didn't have to gather them all up. Okay, fine. But still. V'hinei yitztarech lahavi mikulam sheyolidu kimotam. Noach had to bring a minimum of 2 of each of these types of species. V'ka'asher te'asof lekulam ma'achal asher yochal l'shanat mima. And on top of that, he needed food to feed the animals for a full year. A full year and 10 days was how long they spent on the teva. Lo tachilo to'at teva azot. The teva, which was 300 amos long and 50 amos wide and 30 amos high, which is, maybe the biggest vessel ever made in the world to that point. Lo tachilo to'at teva azot v'lo eser keyot seba, says the Ramban. This teva isn't big enough to fit that many animals, and not 10 like it. Okay? So it's a question that I think has probably come across our minds as we've done it before. Maybe we're embarrassed to ask it, but it says, it's just not going to work. That this teva is going to hold all of that. Okay, so answers the Ramban, not surprisingly. Aval hu nes, it's a miracle. Hechzik mu'at et hamerubeh, right? The small, meaning the teva, was able to hold all of the animals, even though the animals were of a size and of a number that teva could not have held. Okay, it's a miracle. Now it gets interesting. Says the Ramban, wait, if it's a miracle, I have a better question then. V'im tomar ya'asena kitana v'yismoch ala nes hazeh. If God's going to make a miracle, then let Noach build like a rowboat, okay, with a covering, or like let him build a small boat, and then there'll be a huge miracle. An elephant will go on some small boat, which wouldn't fit. Why not do that? So answers the Ramban. Ra'a Hashem yitbarach la'asotam gidola kidei sheyiru ota b'nei doro v'yitmehu ba. That's the point I said before. Says the Ramban, no, God wanted Noach to build an enormous teva because everybody would see it. Right? You can't build, that size vessel without everybody stopping and saying, hey, what is that? V'yisapru alav, they'll ask about it. V'yidabru b'inyan hamabul. Then Noach will tell him, well, there's going to be a flood. V'kinus ha'be'ema v'chayav ha'ov l'tocha. Ulai ya'asu tshuva. Okay, so the first answer is, Noach had to build an enormous teva, not because it was necessary to hold all the animals. It wasn't. It took a miracle to put all the animals on a teva that size. He could have built a smaller one. But if you have to build such an enormous teva, you have to make a spectacle out of it. And then people are going to ask you, and you're going to have to answer, and it will be an opportunity for people to do tshuva. Okay? Again, none of this is in the psukim, but it's the point we made before. The question that's an open question, really, how much did Noach try, if at all, to get people to do tshuva? So in this answer, the Ramban says he had no choice but to get people to do tshuva, because people would ask him, what in the world are you doing? Are you out of your mind? And the answer is no. God told me to build a teva because the world is going to be flooded. That's the first answer. But it's the second answer that I really want to focus on, because I think it's fascinating. Says the Ramban, Va'od, Asu ota gidola lema'et b'nes. Says the Ramban, it's the Ramban in a number of places. The Ramban believes in what we could call like the theory of the minimization of miracles. God doesn't like to make miracles, and God does everything he can to avoid making miracles. So says the Ramban, Noach had to build a teva as big as he possibly could, as big as would float. And then God, what is the way that miracles happen, says Ramban? La'asotam ma shebiyad adam la'asot. We, humanity, has to do everything that we can. V'hashar yiyeh bidei shamayim. And then God does, and that which we can't do naturally, God does supernaturally. But the point is, without us doing our part, God's not going to do his part. And without, speechifying too much, that's what's going on now, right? We have an army. The army fights. The army does as much as it can. Tzahal does as much as it can to protect us. And the rest is up to God. But to think that without Tzahal, we could just daven or learn, and that would help us, says the Ramban, no, that's not true. We have to do our part. The way you get a miracle to happen is not by doing nothing and praying. The way you get a miracle to happen is by doing as much as you can. And then God does the rest. If you do as much as you can, God will do the rest. And obviously, we daven with all of our hearts, and we learn, and we do everything we can to make that come true. So that Tzahal does its part, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu does the rest. Okay, that's that piece in the Ramban. And I think that that's a really, really significant worldview of the Ramban, which is God does miracles in response to our actions. Fine. Next. Says the Torah in Perek Chet, now we're past the Mabul. Okay, the Mabul happens. It's very bad. It destroys the world. Now Noach comes out of the Teva. And we read as follows. Pasuk Chaf Aleph. Vayarach Hashem et reach hanichoach vayomer Hashem el libo lo osif lekalel odet ha'adama ba'avur ha'adam ki yetzer lev ha'adam ra minu rav v'lo osif od la'akot et kol chai kasher asiti. God says vayomer Hashem el libo. So the Ramban's question is going to be, what does it mean el libo? But the point is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm not going to destroy the world again. Okay, what does it mean el libo? So, just by way of introduction, but we often think to ourselves that we, the readers of Chumash, obviously know less about what happened than the people who were there. But the Ramban doesn't think so. The Ramban thinks, for example, that the narrator, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, tells us things that maybe people at the time didn't know. And this is a good example. Vayom Hashem el libo. What does it mean el libo? Says the Ramban. Lo gila hadavar l'navi bizman hahu. God didn't tell Noach at the time. Whatever it is that he's saying now, lo osif od lekalela ta'adama ba'avur ha'adam ki yetz elev ha'adam ra minu rav. God did not tell that to anybody at the time. Rak biyom tzavoto et Moshe biktivat HaTorah gila elav. What happens is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu thought it at the time. God thinks, you know what? It's not fair. I'm not going to wipe out the world anymore. But he doesn't tell Noach. Later on, when he's dictating the Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu, he tells Moshe Rabbeinu, put it in. But nobody knew at the time. Ki ka'asher hikriv Noach karbano ala l'ratzon. When Noach brought a carbon after the Mabul, and God accepted it, v'gazav shelo yosif la'akot et kol chai. So then he decided he's not gonna smite the Jewish people, or he's not going to smite humanity with another flood. Ukvar kasafti b'zeh sod nirmaz l'rabotenu. There's some secret to the rabbis. V'tam ba'avur ha'adam ki ba'avuro ne'enshu v'im adam lo chata hayu hem nitzolim afa pi shehishchitu gam hem darkam. Why does it say that it's all dependent on humanity? So the Ramban says, because it is all dependent on humanity. The flood was brought because humanity sinned. The animals also sinned. They don't really matter. If humanity had not sinned, the animals would have been spared. And because humanity did sin, the animals were wiped out also. Okay, but back to the main point. The main point is, sometimes you find in the Torah, it's specific here, but it's a bigger idea in the Ramban. Sometimes you find in the Torah a pasuk. It doesn't mean that the people at the time were privy to that information. God never said to Noach, I'm not going to destroy the world anymore. But God thought it. And all that time later, when Moshe Rabbeinu wrote down the Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him to include this detail so that we would know it now, even though Noach did not know it. Now, why didn't Noach know it? Or was it necessary for Noach to know it? I don't know. But it's necessary for us. Because God is making a statement now. God is saying, whatever happens going forward, this is no longer an option for punishment of the world. Okay, and that's a significant fact for us to know, and therefore the Torah tells it to us now. Okay, let's keep going forward. Perek Tet, Pasuk Yud Bet. We're further in the parasha. Noach and his children come out of the Teva, and God says as follows. This he does say to them. Vayomer Elokim, Zot ot haberit asher ani notein beini uveinechem uvein kol nefesh chaya asher itechem lidorot olam. Says HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Noach, this is the sign that I'm giving you between me and you forever. What is the sign? Et kashti natati be'anan, it's the rainbow. Vayita la'ot brit beini uvein haaretz. It'll be a sign of my covenant between me and humanity. Okay, now, there's nothing like a rainbow to trigger a machlokes, right? There's some people who think, tell everybody there's a rainbow, they should look at it. There's some people who think, no, the rainbow is a sign of anger, right? Doesn't the rainbow mean that God wanted to destroy the world and didn't? So how do we see the rainbow? So says the Ramban, Zot ot habrit asher ani notein, mimashma min ha'ot hazeh shelo haya keshet be'anan b'maaseh breshit. Va'ata bara Hashem chadasha la'asod keshet b'shamayim b'yom anan. He said the simple reading, or it seems to be in the pasuk, that God made up something new. There had never been a rainbow before in the world. And God said, you know what? I'm now establishing this thing called a rainbow. And this rainbow is going to be a sign of my covenant between me and you. Va'amru b'tam ha'ot hazeh. Why is it a rainbow? Ki hakeshet lo asa'o shiyu raglav lamala sheyireh ki'ilu min hashamayim morim bo. Right? We don't think this way. But at the time where the bow and arrow was the way that people made war, so the Ramban says, what is a keshet? A keshet is an upside down bow. What does that mean, an upside down bow? It means that if there was a string, it would be at the bottom, right? And the bow is at the top. Which way does that shoot? This is the Ramban. Well, it would shoot up. Meaning the point is that we humans don't have to worry about being shot by God, right? It's a sign of peace. Says the pasuk, "V'amru b'tam ha'ot hazeh ki hakeshet lo asu she'yireh raglav lamala she'yireh ki'ilu min hashamayim morim bo." We don't want to make it look like they're shooting at him from heaven. V'yishlach chitza v'yifitzein ba'aretz. No, not that. Aval asa'o behefech mizeh laharot shelo yoru bo min hashamayim. Says the Ramban, there's something meaningful in the bow. It's facing the wrong way. V'chein derech hanilchamim lahafoch oto biyadam kacha kasher yikru l'shalom lemisha kenegdam. If I want to show somebody that I come in peace, I hold the bow and arrow with the bow on my side, right? Means I can only shoot it. You can only shoot one way. So I hold the bow and arrow in a way that makes it clear, like a person lahavdil nowadays, or not lahavdil, drops his gun or holds his gun up or makes it clear he's not holding the gun in a way that will shoot. So everybody knows that he's not going to shoot. That's what the rainbow looks like to people at that time. That's what the rainbow should look like to us. It's a sign from God, kiviyachol, that he's not going to shoot anymore. Okay, and on top of that, says Ramban Va'od, she'ein lekeshet yeter lekonein chitzim alav. There's also no bow. There's no way to shoot the bow. There's no way to shoot the rainbow because it's missing the string. That's also a sign of peace. Okay, so right now the Ramban says, okay, that the bow and arrow, A, there's no string to shoot from, and B, it's facing the opposite direction to make it clear that God is not shooting at humanity. Second, it seems like God just invented or just created the rainbow to make this point. But what are you going to do? Says the Ramban, "Va'anachnu al karchenu na'amin l'divrei Yevanim." We believe scientists. We believe maybe the Greeks. But what does it mean? Shemilat hashemesh ba'avir halach ya'keshet b'tolada. The Ramban knows what he's talking about. He says if you refract the sunlight through moisture, it makes a rainbow. How does he know this? Ki b'kli mayim lifnei hashemesh yireh kimarei hakeshet. If you hold up a glass of water to the sun, you'll see some form of a rainbow. V'ka'ashen nistakel od b'lashon hakatuv navin kein. When you take another look at the Psukim, says the Ramban, this is really the case. Ki amar et kashti natati be'anan. V'lo amar et kashti ani notein ba'anan. Says the Ramban, in the Psukim it's clear, there already was such a thing called a rainbow. It's just now God is designating the rainbow as a sign of his covenant with us. Ka'asher amar zot ot habrit asher ani notein. Umilat kashti moresh shaytolo hakeshet tchila. So in the Machlokes, when was the keshet invented? Says the Ramban, it seems obvious it was invented at the beginning of time. There was always a rainbow. But now, v'lachein nefaresh hakatuv hakeshet asher natati be'anan miyom habriya tihiyeh min hayom hazeh v'hala la'ot brit beini u'veinechem. That keshet that has existed since the beginning of the world is now being designated by me, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as a sign of peace, as a sign of my covenant between me and the Jewish people. Now the Ramban goes on to discuss, yeah, but what's the meaning of it? And the Ramban makes a significant point, which I'm not going to read inside, but I'll just tell you outside. The Ramban says, there doesn't have to be meaning to something that symbolizes a covenant. Me and you, we make a covenant. The covenant is, I don't know, this phone, this sefer, that we identify an object and we infuse that object with deeper meaning. That object represents the fact that X, Y, and Z. So the Ramban, same thing here. The rainbow always existed, but now we're identifying the rainbow as a sign of a covenant between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his people. Okay. Last Ramban for the day. It's towards the end of the parsha, and it has to do with the Dor HaFlaga. Perek Yud Halacha Hey, Perek Yud Pasuk Hey, says as follows. Me'ele nifridu iye hagoyim ba'artzotam ishli lishano lemishprotam begoyehem. Right? From this, all the people dispersed across the world and made up all the different lands and all the different languages, etc., etc. The Ramban starts with the Rambam, who unusually he quotes to agree with. Okay, right in the middle of the Ramban, it's a long piece. In the middle says the Ramban, V'harav amar b'mora hanevuchim, ki ze ye'amet lashomim chidush ha'olam. This story of Dor HaFlaga helps to emphasize the truth of the story of creation. Why? And it's interesting because I never thought of this before. V'gam ze emet, says the Ramban, I think he's right. Ki Avraham, so the first part the Ramban doesn't explain is, he's right because when somebody would say, wait, if the world was created and everybody lived in the same place, well, how did everybody get to all these different places? So the answer, says the Rambam, and quoted approvingly by the Ramban, is, well, there was a Dor HaFlaga, and God dispersed them. And when we know that God dispersed them, we now understand that it was probably true that God created the world. And in a natural way, probably they wouldn't have gotten as far as China, and as far as Asia, and as far as, I don't know if they got to North America then. Depends if you believe in the Ice Age or not, I suppose. But, so the Rambam says, no, that proves creation. But it's proven in another way. And this is something I'd never noticed before, so if I could share it with you, that would be great. Ki Avraham Avinu yitzavet banav ve'et b'nei beito acharav. Right? Avraham, we know from the Pasuk, is going to command his children to believe all the things that we were taught. V'ya'id lahem al Noach u'banav shera'u hamabul. Avram's going to tell his children about Noach and his children who didn't just believe in the Mabul, they saw it, they were participants. The unstated fact is Avraham knew Noach, right? If you do the lineages, if you match up the years, Avraham and Noach overlapped. So Avraham met Noach, and Noach told him the story. V'hayu bateva, v'hinehu eid mi pi eid bi'inyan kol hamabul. So the first thing is, Avram Avinu doesn't just believe there was a flood, he knows there was a flood. He met somebody who survived the flood, who told him about it. He's an aid mipi aid, a witness from a witness. Ve'aid revi'i al yitzira. Now the Ramban sort of goes to town. He's in addition to that, he's a fourth-hand aid to the actual creation of the world. Why? Ki Noach ra'a aviv. Noach knew his father Lemech. Shera'a Adam harishon. Says the Ramban, if you do the years, Lemech, Noach's father, met Adam harishon. So therefore, Adam harishon told Lemech about the creation of the world. Now, this is a bit of an iffy proposition because Adam harishon didn't really watch God create the world. But Adam harishon knew that he was the first person ever created and that he had no parents and that God created him and that he's not a descendant of monkeys. So he knew all that and he told it to Lemech, who told it to Noach, who told it to Avraham. V'Yitzchak v'Yaakov, Avraham's son and his grandson, Ra'u Shem, Ha'id b'Mabul, Ha'id b'Mabul. They knew Shem. Shem outlived Noach, and they met him. And so they told Yitzchak and Yaakov directly about the Mabul. V'Yaakov magid kol ze liyardei Mitzrayim. And Yaakov Avinu then told it to his descendants who went down to Mitzrayim. Gam lefaro v'anshei doro. I'm not sure why this is important, but he thinks that Yaakov Avinu told it to Paro. He told it to his whole generation. V'ha'anashim b'chol dor yodi'im me'avotam arba'a v'chamisha dorot magidim ma'asehem v'toldotehem. So in this way, the Ramban says, it was only 4 or 5 generations removed for the people to believe all the stories that came behind them. They met people who lived at the beginning of time. They met people who lived through the Mabul. And so, it's strange to us, but the people who left Mitzrayim, were only 2 generations or maybe 3 generations removed from people who had seen all the stories in Sefer Bereshis. And the Ramban thinks this is a significant point in our Masorah. Like sometimes we mislead ourselves. We think to ourselves, the 7th generation, okay, so he doesn't know what happened in the 1st generation. But 7 generations saw each other. Your grandfather's grandfather was at your birthday party. That's how it worked. And so the Ramban says, if that's the case, everybody knew. Everybody knew completely. And when the Torah came, it wasn't as if the Torah had to fill in all these blanks and had to tell people stories that they didn't know before. The Ramban goes out his way to say the Dor Yotzei Mitzrayim, or the Dor Ba'ei Mitzrayim at least, came with absolute knowledge of what came before them. Absolute knowledge of creation, absolute knowledge of the flood, absolute knowledge of the dispersal. They knew it all. And they knew it all because the Masorah was really, really important to them, as it's really, really important to us. Okay? So that's it for today. We did a bunch of Rambans, some really significant ones, some less significant. The Ramban about Bidorotav, doesn't know what the big deal is. Obviously, Noach was the only tzaddik in his generation. That's why. The fact that the Mabul had to be built by us, that the Teva had to be built by us and wasn't large enough, that point about miracles, I think, is really significant in the Ramban and in Judaism in general. The way we get God to do a miracle is by doing as much as we can, and then the rest God has to take care of. Hopefully it'll be a zchus for us, for the captives, for the chayalim, for all of Klal Yisrael. Have a Shabbat Shalom.